Alright, so I've been wanting to do this video for quite some time, and I recently got a comment on one of my videos suggesting I do this rib comparison. So what I'm talking about is comparing two racks of ribs cooked identical besides the wrap. One of them is going to be wrapped in foil, one of them is going to be wrapped in butcher paper. When they're finished, we're going to see cooking time differences once they're wrapped. Then, most importantly, we're going to compare tenderness and flavor and bark. So before we get into cooking these ribs, I want to show you how to make a fantastic barbecue rub for some ribs. So let's get into it. Alright, so this is going to be a super simple rub. As usual, start off with some kosher salt here. We're going to do a couple tablespoons, maybe a little more. We want some black pepper, a couple tablespoons. Some paprika, 2 tablespoons. So about equal parts of these 3 ingredients. A little chili powder, say about a tablespoon or so. Same with some garlic powder. So just to recap, salt, pepper, garlic powder, paprika, mustard powder, and then a little bit of cayenne depending on how much you want. Then just go ahead and mix that up. You can also go ahead and add a little bit of sugar if you want some sweetness to it. I usually omit the sugar because I add a barbecue sauce later, which is sweet. And that is our delicious barbecue rub. Super simple. This is fantastic on absolutely all barbecue items, chicken, pork. You could even throw it on beef, but with beef I'm usually salt, pepper, garlic. But now that we have our season ready, let's go ahead and prep these ribs. Alright, so for this we're going to be using St. Louis style pork ribs. Now a lot of times when I do St. Louis ribs, I like to buy the spare ribs, cut them up myself to a St. Louis style, but today I just bought these St. Louis style pre-trimmed ribs. So let's go ahead and open these up. Alright, so in this pack, there's 3 racks of St. Louis ribs. So I'm going to try and get 2 that are similar in size. And I'm thinking these 2 here are the best bet. So we will save this one for later. And these will be our 2 that we are using today. So let's go ahead, start the prep on this one. What I'm going to do here, see there's this flap of meat and then a bunch of fat underneath there. That's not going to cook too well, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut this last bone off. And I'll just trim this little piece off of here. Now on the other side, I usually like to just square it up. So I'll kind of find one of those last bones here. Trim that off and round this out a little bit. Then just pull any fat off that's kind of hanging on the back. Let's get these flipped over. Just want to round this off a little bit, make them look nice. That's a pretty good smaller rack here. These are probably going to cook fast just because they're thinner. So let's go ahead, do this last rack. We're just going to try and match it up. So again, I'm going to cut that last bone off. There's some cartilage here you're going to have to cut through. Then just to get a similar size, I'm going to kind of match this up here. Then make sure you save all your trimming because you can do some great things with it. If you want to bone it out, you can make sausage with it, make some broth if you want. But there's our 2 racks of ribs. They look pretty good in size. I think this will be a fair comparison. You can see there's a little fat on here. That'll be all right. A little meatier, I think, on these ones, but not too bad. So I think we'll have a good comparison. Now I'm just going to go ahead, pat these off with a paper towel. Now I always prefer to leave the membrane on these ribs. See, the membrane is kind of off on this one. That'll be fine. If you cook these properly, this membrane will cook thoroughly and it's not going to be chewy or anything. And what I like is that it holds in all this fat under here. Because here where there's no membrane, this fat's going to render out. It's just going to drip down into the smoker. This is going to hold in all that fat. So again, I prefer to leave the membrane on the ribs. So let's go ahead and get our seasoning and we'll season these up. And I like to season the membrane side first. We'll get our edges and flip them over and season this top side. Now since these are thinner ribs, you don't have to go so heavy on the rub. That looks good like that. I just like to give them a pat. And these are ready. I'm going to be cooking these on my Z-Grills pellet smoker because it's going to be nice, consistent heat, and I want to keep the variables low just with the paper and foil so we can really see the difference that the paper and foil is going to make. And the Z-Grills pellet smoker is one of the best pellet smokers I've ever used out there. I have a review video on that. I will put a link down below, and I'll also leave a link at the end of the video if you're interested in seeing those and looking more into a Z-Grills pellet grill. But like I said, they're a fantastic pellet grill. Highly suggest them. But these are all set, so let's go out and throw these on the smoker. Alright, so I got the Z-Grills all preheated. We are running this at 250 today. So let's go ahead and get these ribs on. Now what I like to do when I get the ribs on here is just scrunch them up a little bit. Helps them cook more evenly and gives them a better shape. So they're on. Let's get this closed up and let them cook. So a lot of times when I do ribs on a pellet smoker, I like to run it around 225, not 250, but that's more for baby backs. Since the St. Louis ribs have a lot more fat in them to render down, I like to kick that temperature up to around 250. Now, I'm gonna let them cook probably for 3 to 4 hours. We'll go out there and check them after a couple hours though. Then once that bark is looking good, we'll go ahead, get them wrapped with some barbecue sauce. One's going to be in foil and one's going to be in paper. But for now, we'll just let them smoke. Let's jump ahead, go out there and check on these ribs. All right, it's been 3 hours. I'm at 198 here, 195. The one back here, we're at about 183, 191. So temperature-wise, these are pretty much done. So I don't really want to let them go much longer unwrapped, or we're going to have a fully cooked unwrapped rib, which is a totally good option, but that's not what we're doing in this video. We're comparing foil versus paper, and you can see here we have some really nice pullback from the bone. So let's get these off. We will get this one wrapped up in butcher paper and this one wrapped up in foil. All right, so we are going to start with the foil wrapped ribs. Now the bones tend to puncture the foil, so I'd advise using 2 sheets. And here are the ribs that we're wrapping in foil. You can see they do have a nice crispy crust on here. So we're gonna go ahead and lay them down like this. I like to keep the bones away from the side I'm gonna be folding. Now I know traditionally it's honey butter and brown sugar, wrap it up, unwrap them, add the barbecue sauce. I really don't do that method. I just like adding a little barbecue sauce on here. This is some homemade barbecue sauce I had from last time I did ribs. And when you use a sauce, you don't want it to be too thick. You want it more of a thin style barbecue sauce. Take that cap off. You can see this isn't too thick, and this is right out of the fridge. So when it warms up, it's even thinner. You want to add a good amount. It's a heavy vinegar sauce, basically, as I like. And I'm sure you know that if you've seen my videos. So just go ahead and kind of coat these ribs with this barbecue sauce. Then we can go ahead and get these wrapped up. And then we'll add our second layer of foil. That is that. And when I do this method, I like to put it meat side down back on the smoker for the final end of the cook. So all that meat is kind of sitting in that barbecue sauce, getting nice and flavorful and tender. But these are ready. Let's go ahead and do our paper ribs now. With the paper, you will only need 1 piece of paper. And here is our other rack of ribs. Just as gorgeous. Nice rendered down membrane there. So let's go ahead and get these wrapped up. Same treatment, just some barbecue sauce. and just get that sauce all over the ribs, nicely coated, and then get them wrapped up. And same thing, we're gonna go meat side down. So we've got our 2 racks of ribs. I'm gonna get these out on the smoker and let them probably go for another hour and a half, 2 hours. I know that they were almost done when I pulled them off. Pulling them off, getting them wrapped, covering them with all this barbecue sauce is really gonna slow down the cooking time. So they're gonna have to reheat, which is gonna take some time, then start cooking again. So an hour and a half to 2 hours, they'll be done. You're just looking for probe tender, probably around 205 degrees to 210 degrees is what you want. At that point, I'm gonna take them out, let them rest for an hour or two, and then I will see you right back out here to give them a try. So let's go ahead, unwrap them, check them out, we'll slice them up, I will give them a try, and we will see the difference. So let's get this paper wrapped one unwrapped first. Ooh, smells fantastic. Now you can see here, beautiful looking rack of ribs. You can see how it's not too wet, and that was with a very thin sauce. So if you use a thick sauce, it's really gonna thicken up even more on you. That's why I suggest going with a thinner style sauce when wrapping ribs. Let's go ahead and unwrap these foil ribs. See how these look, and remember we double wrap these. So right off the bat, I'll pull these out so you guys can see. These are a lot more wet than these. Let me see if we can get a nice comparison. You can see the sauce on here is a lot more wet than the ones on the butcher paper. It dried out a lot more. These also feel a lot more tender than these ones that were in the butcher paper. So we already have a few differences here. Let's go ahead and slice a few ribs out of each one of these and see how they came out. And yeah, this one's definitely a lot more tender. So I'm gonna get some of the best ribs out of each one of these. Just do 3 of the same. And I can feel by cutting it, this one is a lot more tender. But again, tenderness might not be what you're looking for in ribs. So let's get 2 of these ribs. I'll give you a little close up. This one's foil, this one's paper. You can see this one's got a lot more of a dry crust. This one's a lot more wet. If you look at the side-by-side view here, this one does look a little more juicy. There's also more meat on this one. But again, this looks like a really good rib here. This one definitely you can tell is a lot more tender how it's pulling apart here. But let me go ahead and give them a try and we will know exactly how they came out. So I'm gonna start with the foil wrapped rib here. It's definitely a very delicious rib. Super tender. You can see how it kind of just falls right off the bone there. That is extremely tender. And again, you might be looking for that, you might not, but that is good. Now let's go with the paper wrapped rib. This seems a little more like a traditional rib to me. So let me go ahead and give it a try. Just as delicious in a different way. Still perfectly tender, but this is a more traditional style rib the way that it feels. This one is much more tender, which for me, I like the rib that does have a little bite to it, but you can see it still comes right off the bone here. So it's still nice and tender. See, it just falls apart. It obviously doesn't come off the bone as easily as the foil wrapped rib, but you can see here, it does come clean off the bone. These are both absolutely delicious ribs. So it really comes down to what are you looking for? The foil wrapped ribs, that sauce stays nice and wet in there and it gets extremely tender, fall off the bone. Now with the paper wrapped one, it gets a much better bark on there, which I really like. It is still tender enough where it comes off the bone, the flavor and the bark. It's not dry, but that is my pick, is the paper wrapped ribs. I'm really happy I did this test because I have used both these methods and I go back and forth between them, but I've never done it side by side to really see the difference. Now with the foil wrapped, like I said, you're gonna get a lot more tenderness and more sauciness, but if you're looking for that traditional barbecue style rib, I would suggest doing the butcher paper. What you can do is, after you unwrap them like this, go ahead and give them a little more sauce, throw them back on the smoker for about 30 minutes, and if you want to sauce your rib, that is, and you'll be ready to go. But you can't beat the bark that's on those butcher wrap style ribs, so that's my choice. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a like. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe right over here. And if you want to see the review video to the pit barrel cooker, I'll put it right over here along with more of my other videos. But most importantly, get out there and smoke something good.